Hey, it's me again. We need to talk. We need to talk specifically about everyone's favorite floating space wizards, the Warlocks. Or specifically, about what's been going wrong with Warlock as of late. Intro aside, this will be one of my usual batch of thoughts as to what I feel like is a big problem with Destiny 2. And this has been a problem that's been continually growing for the past 2 to 3 years now. So let's talk about Warlock and about my concerns with Warlock. And to do this, we need to take a little trip down memory lane. So let's start with a little bit of history and my concerns with what Bungie has been doing with Warlocks. These concerns started way back with the release of Beyond Light. You may recall, and if you don't, a little teaser here, that I released a video way back in November of 2020 called The State of Destiny to November 2020. Yeah, 2.5 years ago. And in that video, I was very swift on my criticism for Bungie's abhorrent treatment with the Warlock class and how quickly the brand new Shadebinder kit was slapped with nerfs, while both the Hunter and Titan kits were allowed to roam freely with overpowered broken stasis combos that would not actually be addressed for multiple seasons of time in advance. We had to go a whole year with Hunters and Titans abusing shatter mechanics, and then Warlocks not even having anything other than one little overpowered melee ability for about a week of time before it was nerfed. Now, these criticisms on the treatment of Warlock continued well throughout the year of Beyond Light. We saw incredibly lackluster armor pieces, including Mantle of Battle Harmony, Boots of the Assembler, and then a dumbed down version of Nothing Manacles. There was really only one saving grace for Warlock in the Beyond Light year. It was Bleakwatcher. That was the only thing that Warlock actually got that was good for the entire year of Beyond Light. Glacial Harvest, to this day, remains the weakest, the absolute weakest stasis aspect as it pertains to shard generation. Well, not that anyone even cares about shards currently, but you get my point. Okay, so that was the Beyond Light year. Now we pan forward to the Witch Queen. So things actually started in a better spot. I actually did, at the time, give a good insight into if this was how 3.0 was going to be handled, then, we had a lot to be hopeful for. Void 3.0 came out in a great spot for Warlocks. We even saw an incredible exotic armor piece in the form of Osmiomancy gloves, which to this day still remains one of the only useful stasis exotic armor pieces for Warlock. Unfortunately, this joy that Void 3.0 provided would be incredibly short-lived, as the rest of the year was filled with nothing but disappointment for Warlock. Both Solar and Arc 3.0 shipped so weakly that Bungie was forced to hotfix in buffs to these subclasses. Both Solar and Arc had hotfixes for buffs that the kits had. Even then, after these hotfixes, the subclasses were still left in a terrible place. Insult to injury aside, guess what happened throughout the rest of that year? More lackluster exotic armor pieces. Rain of Fire, Fallen Sunstar. Both of those are useless outside of very specific niche applications. So now we've reached where we are with recent memory. Lightfall shipped with a brand new element, and we got a new subclass, the Broodweaver. Bungie marketed this as a summoner class. So far, the only summoning that we're doing is from casting your Rift and consuming your grenades. Now, the Super can augment this in a minor regard, but it still feels well below the expectations of what it was advertised to be. So, with all this in mind, why am I doing a video now instead of when this problem actually started? So I've actually been a Warlock main since the beginning of Destiny 1, and I've been through the whole ups and downs of this. But at this point in time, I really feel like the bland, obvious class favoritism is clear as day, to the point that someone really needs to come out and say something about the problem. I'm going to chat about the specific problems with Solar and Arc 3.0 And then I'm also going to have a little bit on Stasis and Strand later in the video. But to really start talking about this whole class favoritism problem as a whole, we need to talk about the general gameplay loop of Warlock in general. So let's take a look at what this is actually supposed to be. Now, Warlock was always advertised to be the Space Wizard class. This is a class that was supposed to be focused heavily on ability play over gunplay. Now, gunplay was supposed to be a fantasy that the Hunter class was supposed to focus in, and, for the most part, it did a very good job of that. However, everything started to change when the 30th anniversary pack launched at the end of the Beyond Light year. In that release, Bungie said that they wanted to tone down the ability usage in the game and focus more on gunplay. Now, this would be fine if abilities weren't so baked into the Warlock kit to begin with. Now, the problem I feel originates from the key difference in movement and maneuverability offered to all the classes. Warlocks have the weakest maneuverability of all three classes, and this primarily sources from the behavior of their jump ability, which is a glide. Now, the other two classes, they have impulse-based jump behaviors, so they can quickly start and have more of a fall off in their jump, whereas Warlock has a much smoother height curve, so it has a longer transition. The big difference, though, as it pertains to Warlock, originates in both class abilities and melee abilities. Hunters have dodges and very quick to activate jump abilities. All Titans have some form of a charged melee ability that, prior to next week's Season of the Deep launch, does not consume their ability energy, so they can quickly move across the map. What about Warlocks? Well, we have one movement ability on our Solar class, Icarus Dash. This actually strikes me as hilarious that some Titan mains were so salty over the nerf to shoulder charge that they went on Reddit and all but demanded a nerf to the only Warlock movement ability just to preserve Warlocks being on the lowest end of maneuverability. This actually goes hand in hand to the fact that Hunters and Titans have a much significantly higher usage rate in the Crucible, and this originates to three aspects. First, Hunters and Titans have much more potent PvP-focused exotic armor pieces and subclass kits. Second, because Hunters and Titans have a much higher level of maneuverability and ease of access to it, it is much easier to perform high-skilled movement tech on Hunters and Titans compared to Warlocks. And then finally, both of those classes have free access to one-hit kill melee abilities, whereas Warlocks don't have a single one-hit kill melee. About the only thing that could be considered a one-hit kill melee ability on the Warlock is the Lightning Surge, which is something that I don't think even belongs on Warlock, and we'll talk about this later on. Oh, and by the way, the whole Lightning Surge thing, it's getting nerfed next week anyways, so it's not even going to be a one-hit kill melee ability anymore. So this is just one part of the game that I feel really needs to be targeted for a major shakeup. So hitting the whole maneuverability issue is one aspect that I think Warlock really needs help with. But we're going to focus in on a couple of other points today to kickstart it. So the first pain point that I want to bring up for Warlock today is our Warlock Rift. Now, Warlock Rift has been in the game since the inception of Destiny 2, but Warlock Rift is a little different than the other two class abilities in the game. Rift has a significantly longer casting animation, and it has the longest cooldown of all three of the class abilities in the game. So you would think that it would be the most potent of the three. Circumstantially, however, that is not the case. It is not the most potent of the three by a long mile. Now sure, having healing on demand, that's a very strong gameplay ability. But guess what? There are weapons, exotic armor pieces, and perks on weapons that can offer the exact same benefits on demand and without a cooldown. And then there's Empowering Rift. Empowering Rift has been dumpstered by Warlocks to the point where Bungie needed to introduce an exotic armor piece to the game, Secant Filaments, to make them feel even usable in the endgame. But there's a couple problems with it. First, the exotic was only designed with a Void subclass in mind, so if you're not using Void, well, forget about it. And second, the most recent update to the game, which granted the ability for subclass verbs to stun champions, basically just removed the whole usability factor on this exotic anyways. And then there's the kicker. Talking about casting time, the amount of times I have been killed in the Warlock Rift cast animation is hilarious. If you compare the cast times of the other class abilities, only Titans come close. And then when you actually cast a barricade, it actually blocks the incoming fire, whereas while you're casting a rift, you're stuck in position, can't move, and you're still taking fire. So there's a lot that Rift needs to actually be fixed, and I want to talk about a few things that I think Bungie should do to Rift. The first thing that Bungie needs to do is actually fix the difference between the two rifts. As I mentioned, no one uses Empowering Rift, and even with Secant Filaments, it's not even that good of a thing anymore. So I think that the current version of Empowering Rift is never going to find usability in the game, so I think that Bungie just needs to cut their losses and kill Empowering Rift. What I would do is I would just merge Healing Rift and Empowering Rift into one rift and just call the new rift Empowering Rift. And then replace the second rift with something called Elemental Rift. So if you want to actually have something that offers differences between the two rifts, having an Elemental Rift grant subclass verbs based on your subclasses would actually incite people to maybe consider switching between the two rifts more often. So for example, Elemental Rift would grant a subclass verb based on the casting subclass. So if, for example, if you cast a Void Rift, you get Volatile rounds, Solar Rift, Scorch rounds, Arc Rift, Jolt rounds, Stasis Rift, Slow rounds, and Strand Rift would be Unraveling rounds. So something to spice up the gameplay loop a bit. The next thing that needs to happen is Rift cooldown needs to be reduced. As I mentioned, Rift is nowhere near as potent as Bungie apparently thinks it is. I mean, sure, as I mentioned, healing on demand is one thing, but the other two class abilities offer so much more potency than Rift does. And then finally, we need to do something about the Rift cast time, Bungie. Please reduce it by at least 50%, if not more. It should be on equal footing to other classes. If not, make it quicker than Titan, but slower than Hunters. Because when you get stuck in a Rift cast animation and you're getting blasted and there's nothing you can do, it is not an experience that is fun or inciting to the game, so please do something about that. So we talked about Warlock Rift now, and that's something that all the subclasses would have to have changed. Now let's talk about the 3.0 verbs, and I want to start with Solar 3.0, which is probably the worst subclass release that Bungie has had for Warlock so far. This one was so bad that most Warlock mains thought that this was some kind of a practical joke being played by Bungie and that they actually hid the actual update down the line. The Daybreak Super was left in a pitiful state. 2 of the 3 aspects were focused on movement alone, which never should have been done. And then Phoenix Dive's cooldown was beyond excessive. Warlocks were forced into one of 2 solar builds at this time. Sunbracer Solar Grenade builds, or Starfire Protocol Well of Radiance builds. 2 effective builds for a complete subclass. See the problem here? Bungie's own advertising at the same time had Solar 3.0 marked as an Incandescent Priest, which would be the high-tier support class of the game, offering both offensive scorching capabilities, which was actually met, whereas the supporting healing capabilities was completely ignored. So sure, you could throw solar grenades or fusion grenades out, but there was no support role outside of the already existent Well of Radiance. Which, by the way, I'll remind everyone that numerous streamers have begged for nerfs on, so it's only a matter of time before that gets nerfed too. Bungie was literally forced to quickly patch in some minor adjustments, which added some healing capabilities to Solar, but even then, this subclass is still in a terrible position. The main super, Dawnblade, has lost all of its usability in PvE for fear of making it too strong in PvP. Well of Radiance is holding on by a thread because it's only going to get nerfed eventually. And the only damage-focused grenade build in Starfire Protocol is now being removed from the game because it's too overpowered. This goes right back to the kicker right at the beginning of the video, Bungie. Warlock is supposed to be an ability-focused class. It's not a gunplay class, it's an ability class. So, what's Bungie doing about this? Well, in Season of the Deep, Bungie is offering a slight bump to Daybreak. To the camera angle. The super is still pitiful and is holding the potential of the full kit back. So let's talk about how we can actually address Solar Warlock. So let's start with the super, Daybreak. Daybreak needs some serious loving to be brought back into the fold. And I feel this starts by doubling the duration of the base super. PvP, be damned. Solar Warlock has very little offensive capabilities, and one of the only remaining ones in Fusion Grenade spam is being tossed from the game. Also, the projectiles should scorch targets by default. We should not be forced to use an exotic in Dawn Chorus just to make our super feel useful. Finally, the overall damage of the super needs a serious bump. If you just double the duration, you get 8 sword throws. The damage needs to be increased such that the swords hit hard enough to be useful. Alright, next up, let's talk about the aspects. I'm going to hit the big ones right away. Heat Rises and Icarus Dash. These two, I know Bungie has said that they didn't want to combine them, but at this point, Bungie, just merge them together. The fact that 2 of the aspects are focused on movement means that truthfully, we only really have one option for an aspect here. Bungie, you guys need to go back to the drawing board here. Redesign Heat Rises or Icarus Dash, merge the 2 together, maybe just merge them into Heat Rises and then redesign Icarus Dash completely. Go back to the drawing board. Go back to that whole logic of the incandescent priest option. Maybe focus on something that grants more support capabilities or healing capabilities. All right, and finally, to wrap off my discussion on Solar, there's the elephant in the room, Starfire Protocol. Now, Bungie devs actually came out on a recent podcast and said that they didn't want to obliterate usage on an exotic in their tweaks, but let's be honest, guys. Reducing the grenade recharge from 20% to 2.5% is going to do just that. Please go back, find a safer middle ground, and then start focusing on the real problem, Bungie. Lackluster exotics. I have been hammering this in my State of Destiny 2 videos for 2 years now. If you want people to stop using Starfire Protocol, stop giving us Rain of Fire. Make exotic armor pieces that offer meaningful gameplay loops. It's the reason why exotics like Starfire Protocol and Sunbracers are so popular. It's because they're actually fun to use. We have an actual gameplay loop, not this niche one-off kind of, oh, here's a slight damage buff when you scorch a target. No one cares about that. Give us something that actually makes the gameplay loop feel more active and engaging. That's how you get people off of Starfire Protocol and Sunbracers. Okay. Next up is Arc 3.0 on my pain point list. And again, this goes to the heart of what 3.0 did. And I can honestly, at this point, just call the 3.0 reworks as take Warlock identity and give it to everyone else. And this was all but inevitable in a 3.0 world because Warlocks for the longest time, as I mentioned, was the ability focus class. So we had all of the ability focus kits. But the ball was pushed so much that when the time came to actually make adjustments to Warlocks, Bungie tried to change the identity of the class as a whole into something that it isn't. They called Arc 3.0 a hold W class, which means you always push forward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Warlocks have the least maneuverability and movement capabilities, so this made the whole experience feel cheesy and non-functional for Arc Warlock. The original problem sourced with Stormcaller being held back by their supers. At the time of the Arc 3.0 launch, Stormcaller was the least used Warlock class in the game because of the supers. Stormtrance and Chaos Reach for the longest time have been incredibly weak options. The only thing that Arc Warlocks had that gave them some cadence was things like Arc Web, which transformed into the Jolt keyword with 3.0. We went 2 whole seasons without a single peep from Bungie, even though the community was railing on Bungie for Stormtrance and Chaos Reach needing significant bumps. Now, Bungie has finally listened and they're making some targeted adjustments to Season of the Deep supers, but I personally don't think it's going to be enough. Just like Solar, Arc also has an aspect problem. Now, Arc Soul, that was one of the original Warlock kit's Arc features, and while it did receive a buff, it still kind of underperforms in the endgame, so some targeted adjustments there would be nice. Electrostatic Mind is utterly useless as an aspect since there are fragments and weapons which when slotted give Titans and Hunters the exact same capabilities. And then Lightning Surge, which was Bungie's attempt to fold Warlock into that whole W paradigm that they wanted to make. It's not working. Now, Arc 3.0, I think Bungie does not have as much work on their plate as Solar does, but it does need help. And a couple of targeted adjustments that I think they could do to really get the ball rolling here would be the following. So, Stormtrance, let the 25% buff go into place. But first and foremost, the super should jolt targets always, not just on the initial cast. The maximum damage is going to need another bump. I don't think 25% is going to be enough. I tested Stormtrance on an unstoppable champion in a Master Nightfall back in Season 18. It did only half of its health of damage. A 25% damage buff is not going to be enough. You're going to need to throw another 25% at a minimum on top of that. For Chaos Reach, if Bungie still seems intent on keeping Chaos Reach to be that hybrid roaming super, then it really needs to pump out the damage to meet that demand. Chaos Reach, in my opinion, should be the Arc super that has the highest potential damage of all of the Arc supers in the game, since it requires the highest amount of risk from the casting player. So, just like Stormtrance, Bungie is giving it a 25% damage buff, but it's going to need to have more, so another 25% on top of that at a minimum. For aspects, I think Arc Soul only needs a couple of adjustments. I think the default rate of fire should be the amplified mode as it is right now, so the fast fire mode. And then while amplified, the projectiles should have maybe a slightly higher damage, like maybe 5 to 10%, and then the ability to jolt targets. Electrostatic Mind needs a complete rehash because, as I mentioned, it's basically a useless aspect that every other class can already do. I think the big thing holding Arc Warlock back right now is in-game survivability, so maybe make this the aspect that gives some help there. So something like Overshield on Ionic Trace Collection or something like that. Just add some survivability here or there. Lightning Surge is going to be the thing that Bungie really needs to redesign. As I said before, this whole slide melee thing is out of place on Warlock. I think instead this should be an aspect that focuses on beefing up your abilities even more. So something that grants you like an overcharge effect that makes your arc abilities and your supers do even more damage. So go back to the drawing board on Lightning Surge and get rid of this silly hold W paradigm for Warlocks. It doesn't fit and it's never going to fit. All right, let's talk about the darkness subclasses now. So Stasis, in lieu of what I'm hoping will eventually be a Stasis 3.0 rework that adds more to Warlock, I'm only going to cover the few things that I think Stasis needs right now. As it pertains to Warlock, Warlock is the only class that has no access to some kind of a shatter ability. Both Titans and Hunters can freely shatter stasis crystals. Warlocks do not have an ability to shatter them. So I think something needs to be done to add the capability to shatter targets outside of the super. Now, adding that 10% damage buff, that's a nice touch. I think the super is actually in a good place right now for Warlock, so that's something I'm glad to see, but I don't really think it's necessary. Glacial Harvest is the big thing that needs a lot of work. The biggest problem with Glacial Harvest is its 10-second cooldown. None of the other shard creation aspects in the game actually have a cooldown. So at this point in time, it's time to just get rid of the cooldown. As I said before, Warlock is about ability usage and, things that recharge your abilities, give you more ability uptime, helps the Warlock as a whole. So drop the cooldown and let's lean more into that ability focus line of thought. As it pertains to everything else for Stasis Warlock, I think we're in an okay spot for now, minus the whole eventual need of a 3.0 update. We'll see what they do, and we'll revisit this topic at a later time. All right, now that leaves us with Strand. So the newest element that was added to the game. And as I said at the beginning of the video, this was supposed to be marketed as the Summoner class. And right now, the only summon that we have is the Threadling. And Threadlings right now are really weak. Even with the Fragment, which is supposed to increase their movement speed and damage, it really doesn't feel like that much of a bump. And the only Threadling build that really gets things going is the Swarmer's exotic, which grants additional unravel capabilities. Now, the first thing that was added was Weaver's Call, which was the first aspect you got, and that allows your Rift casts to spawn 3 Threadlings. And your super, if you have projectiles that don't actually embed in targets, they can spawn Threadlings. The second aspect, Mind Spun Invocation, you can use your Threadling Grenade to spawn 3 Threadlings or consume it to have 5 Threadlings. Or you can use your Grapple to grapple melee a target and spawn more Threadlings. But as I said before, the only problem is that Threadlings right now are in a very bad spot. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is Bungie needs to buff Threadlings. And I think that Weaver's Call should actually do something that gives Warlock Threadlings a bit more of a kick, since, again, Warlock is supposed to be the Summoner class. So the summons on Warlock should be a little more of a punch packer. And I think that what you should do here is redesign the Swarmer's exotic. So just add the unravel capabilities to Weaver's Call by default. So make it so Weaver's Call summons Threadlings and then all Threadlings unravel targets. And then make the Swarmer's exotic something more about summoning a lot more Threadlings. The big problem, though, for Warlock comes with the recent discussion on our first new aspect. So the brand new element, everyone's getting excited about new capabilities being added to the class. You know, we're talking about Titans getting this incredible Strand melee combo, Hunters giving a decoy that spawns Threadlings. And what does Warlock get? Oh, hey, you can go pick up the Tangle, throw it at a target, and suspend them. That's cool. Yeah, see the problem there? How things just did not even meet the same level of interest or excitement or capabilities, for that matter. Who in their right mind thought that putting something on a Tangle would be a good idea? Tangles have an internal 15-second cooldown when you spawn one. And if that's not bad enough, anyone in your team can pick him up. It's like the whole Warmind cell problem all over again. So not only are you going to have to fight your teammates to be able to use this new aspect, but you have to fight the 15-second internal cooldown on spawning Tangles. And what do you get for your troubles? Something that you can throw at a target and suspend them. Well, guess what I can do already with Mind Spun Invocation? I can consume my Shackle Grenade and have the suspend effect chain off of targets for 30 seconds just by using the Necrotic Grasp as exotic armor piece. So this is a problem that I feel like goes right back to the heart of what Bungie has been doing since Glacial Harvest in Beyond Light. As I said before, I think the whole shaft game on Warlock has been a continued thing since the middle of the year for Beyond Light. Ever since we started getting exotic armor pieces with Season of the Chosen, things have been on a downhill progression for Warlock with the exception of Void 3.0. So, I mean, at this point, it's pretty much done. but this aspect is going to need a complete redesign. There's three things that I think Bungie absolutely needs to do if they want this thing to have any kind of usability or point in the game at all. First, you're going to have to kill the tangle cooldown when this aspect is equipped. Like this thing is just not going to have any usability with a 15-second tangle cooldown. Second, you're going to have to make it so when a warlock creates a tangle with this aspect equipped, that warlock character has priority over that tangle. Like, you're going to have to make it so other people can't just come in and swoop the tangle. It's going to have to be locked to that player. And then finally, I mean, the whole suspend thing is nice and all, but tangles as a whole right now, it's another part of the game that feels really underperforming, just like threadlings are. So you're going to have to do something to make this thing feel more usable. I mean, I really hope that this is the only tangle focused thing that you're considering doing. Like, again, I don't know what you were thinking with this one. Like, this really shows that you don't care about Warlocks, I guess, because like you didn't even spend the time to add in some unique effects on it. You hear a name like the Wanderer, you would think that the tangle would at least look a bit different, but nope, it's just a tangle that flies through the air. And then you said it has enhanced tracking capabilities, and then the little clip we saw showed that it just maybe turned a little more towards that one Vex goblin. So yeah, that's gonna hurt. And I really hope that you've got something planned to change the page on things, because shafting Warlocks is getting really old at this point. So a little different video to round out Season of the Defiance, but this is something I wanted to get off my chest. The recent reveal of aspects for Warlocks makes me feel like we're repeating the same cycle of Beyond Light all over again. Bungie, you've seen usability numbers on classes for a long time now. You know that Warlocks are the least used class in the game. Hell, you had to nerf both Hunters and Titans last year in Guardian games just so Warlocks would win last year, an event I don't even care about, by the way. I would imagine if you started being a little more aware of your own design paradigms for the classes and how your reduction of abilities to make gunplay more viable violates the exact setup that you had for Warlocks in the first place. And maybe you should consider, maybe we shouldn't reduce ability uptime for Warlocks, because that's the whole point of the Warlock class. So yes, me being a disgruntled Warlock main, I will clearly say it. Stop shafting my class. I want to see the flashy cool stuff like Bleak Watcher more often. It really helps to drive interest in our class, even when there are many areas that it falls behind compared to Titans and Hunters. So that's going to be it for my video today. Again, a little different, but something I really have to get off my chest. Something I'm really tired of seeing in the game is this whole class favoritism thing. I'll have an update on the game as a whole. So Classic State of the Destiny video in a couple of weeks, probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, to provide an update on where Destiny 2 as a whole is. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see everyone next time.